Hello and welcome to Writing Women, the show where I talk about the women who exist in fiction and the people who created them. This week is Book 2 in Tamara Pierce's Protector of the Small Quartet, Paige. It's finally happened. I'm done with school for the summer. That means I will be branching out a bit and reaching into different mediums other than books for characters because I'll have a lot more time to focus on the channel. I also want to welcome my 2 new subscribers that I've gotten since I uploaded my last video. I've been recovering from a minor surgery and was so excited when I finally got to my laptop and saw the number had ticked upward a little bit. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk a bit about Paige. I'll start with a recap and go from there. All right, make the recap simple. Make it simple, make it simple, make it simple. Whew. The summer is over, and Kel has spent it visiting her horse Peach Blossom at the palace and practicing her riding. She and the other second-year pages are now adding weights to their bodies to run around with. The first thing Kel does in this story is she rescues a dog from one of the palace staff, chasing it down with a meat cleaver. The dog has stolen a link of sausages, apparently not for the first time. The man screams at Kel to let him at the dog so he can skin it, and she refuses. She offers to pay for the sausages, and he leaves. She takes the dog to her room, planning on bringing him to Dane later on. In her room, she is met with the old servant Gower and a girl he identifies as his niece Lalassa. He explains that Lalassa had come to be employed in the palace, but that her meek nature wasn't fit for the work, then practically begs Kel to employ her as a personal maid so he doesn't have to send her away. Kel sees bruises on the girl and figures out that she has been assaulted. She insists that they try to report whoever did it to the king, and Gower explains that, as commoners, they don't have the ability to do that. It would likely cost them their livelihoods, and possibly more if they spoke out against the nobility or senior staff at the palace. Kel agrees to take the girl on, knowing that she will spend most of her money doing so. Gower pretends not to see the dog Kel has with her and leaves, clearly grateful to her. She scrubs up quickly and goes to eat with the other pages who jeer at her for being late. She receives punishment for her tardiness and goes about her business. Later on, Wilden takes her aside and explains to her that she must do right by her new servant, and that a maid doesn't count as a chaperone if there are boys in her room. That evening, she also finds a hot bath ready in her room, and the room itself tidied up. Even the dog has been washed. She notes that this hasn't improved his appearance much. She brings the dog to Dane, who explains that his name is Jump, and agrees to take him in to care for him. Kel comes across Joran up to his old habits in the halls and starts a brawl. This time, the first-year page he has been bullying, named Owen, joins the fight against Joran. He is excited to see how skillfully Kel fights and hopes that he can learn to fight like her at the palace. They receive their punishments from Wilden, and Kel's friends find them. They are angry, thinking that she went patrolling the halls without them, but she explains what happened. They try to start their study group, but realize it's now too big to fit in Neil's room. They all decide to reclaim the library for the younger pages. Since they outnumber Joran and his friends now, it won't be too hard. The library had been a favorite spot for Joran to hunt for bullying targets the previous year. It turns out that the dog prefers to be with Kel and leaps into her room in the morning from outside of her window while she feeds her courtyard sparrows. She thinks it's funny because of his name and asks Lalassa to take him to Dane, but she's afraid that Dane will turn her into something. Kel begins to get frustrated with the girl's timidity. Turns out the dog has its own plans. He follows Kel around the training yards but stays at a distance and gets scratches from Wilden and the other masters. He becomes a fixture with the pages from this point out. After a morning of riding, a brawl breaks out between the pages after Kel is insulted. The horses wind up breaking the whole thing up, breaking out of their stalls to stop the fight. Kel loses her temper with Neil afterward, angry that he and the others are fighting for her honor. They argue over how, if Joran and his friends are calling Kel's honor into question and starting fights over it, Wilden may use it as an excuse to make her leave. Much of Kel's punishments this year involve heights, and she believes that Wilden is helping her manage her fear, while Neil believes that he is torturing her. This comes into play much later in the book, in the climax. Jump continues to jump through the shutters from the courtyard into Kel's room every day. She eventually accepts him as her dog. Kel grows more and more frustrated by Lalassa's fear around her and other people. She doesn't know how to make the girl fear her less. One morning, Kel has difficulty with her weighted harness and also splits open her nightgown. Lalassa is uncharacteristically brisk with her and explains that she will fix Kel's clothes because she's grown taller. She also points out to Kel that her breasts are growing. Kel lets Lalassa manage her pocket money so that she can pay for any materials for clothes that she needs, and Lalassa is amazed by it. She thought that Kel would assume she would steal it if she gave her the money. Later on, Kel finds an adult male servant harassing Lalassa outside her room and threatens him. Lalassa tells Kel that she likes to stay in the room because nobody bothers her there. Neil and Kel teach Lalassa some defensive moves in case she is harassed again. The other pages gather around, impressed by Kel's moves, and she explains that she learned them in the islands. Cleon compliments her using his usual flowery names for her. Before a royal banquet at midwinter, Kel's friends appear in her room and report for inspection of their uniforms. Kel has meticulously groomed herself as well because her parents will be at the banquet. Their trip back to the islands has been cancelled, and they remain at court to assist with new marriage negotiations for Prince Roald and one of the royal family of the islands. Kel is assigned a place waiting on guildmasters at the back of the hall. On her way to her post, she sees a host of faces familiar to the reader, except Alana, who is still not allowed to talk to her, and even manages to greet her parents. During the meal, one of Jorun's friends speaks to the table she is waiting on and tells them who she is. They express their disgust at Kel being a girl and tell her that she's better off going home and praying her parents can make a decent marriage for her before they demand to be served by someone else. The Master of Ceremonies assigns another page to them and tells the kid to keep silent if they try to ask him about Kel. Jorun's friend Garvey later trips Neil, causing him to spill the food he's carrying and messing up the uniforms of those around him. Over the many nights of the midwinter banquet, more accidents happen, and Kel realizes this is why Jorun and his friends had been so quiet lately. Kel is reassigned a bunch during this time too, nobody wanting to be served by the girl. She even served her sisters at one point, and they are both horrified at her being nearby and possibly ruining their marriage prospects. Kel is taunted by another young lady sitting with them, and she's defended by someone she doesn't know. Even her sisters defend her, but only a little. She and her friends get all the other pages together to force Jorun to stop with the pranks because of the extra punishment they are all getting. Kel exchanges gifts with her friends and finds another gift from her benefactor, maintenance equipment from the popular and expensive Raven Armory. She realizes that she has a crush on Neil when she becomes jealous of another lady at court who Neil has a crush on now. She doesn't think that she's the type of person that men fall in love with. Lalassa seems to be more comfortable with Kel now, and Kel talks with her about her crush. On her way to her exams, Kel feels wetness in her crotch and thinks that she wets herself. She runs to her room and finds that she has begun her monthly cycles. Lalassa congratulates her, and Kel is unable to stop a few tears from falling. She's angry that her body is changing without her permission. Lalassa comforts her and tells her she will make willow tea to ease the cramps when she comes back. She also explains how different women are affected differently by their cycle, and the crying is probably just that. Neil comes to fetch Kel, and they hurry to their exams, passing them all. Roald and a few older pages have finished their training and are chosen as squires, and they have to leave. The summer training begins. The sparrows follow Kel like the year before, and this time Jump follows too. Wilden took a liking to the dog and feeds him. Kel thinks it's hard to dislike someone who likes dogs as much as Wilden. During a patrol, Kel and the other pages stumble into a bandit camp. A fight ensues, and Kel has to take command because the older page freezes. She kills a bandit with Jump at her side fighting, and gets her group to safety, but they are now trapped. She sends a sparrow to fetch Wilden while Neil heals as much as he can. They are rescued, but Wilden says Kel must want to go home now that she's seen a real battle isn't for girls. Another page speaks up despite Kel trying to quiet him and tells Wilden that Kel saved them all and even killed one of the bandits. Wilden goes silent and they all ride off. Kel realizes it's her birthday. The Sheng Wildcat informs Kel's parents of what happened, and when she goes home for the summer, they are extremely proud of her. She talks with her mother about her cycle, and her mother offers to get her a charm to ward off pregnancy till she is ready. When they return in the fall, Kel's friends choose first years to sponsor, and Kel is sent on an errand by Gareth of Naxon to bring something to the king, who is scrying at the top of Baelor's Needle, a large tower. Kel is terrified of the height but completes the task. She cannot make herself go back down, however, and the king finds her frozen on the stairs. He uses magic to help her get down and offers her a charm to deal with her fear, but she refuses, wanting to learn to work through it for herself. The king admits that Thayet is afraid of heights as well. After the king's customary dinner with the pages, he sits down with Kel and Wilden to hear the bandit story from her directly. The king compliments her, and she leaves to find her friends worried about why she was with them so long. There is an announcement of a new strategy and tactics course that all fourth-year pages must take, and Kel goes to it out of curiosity. She enjoys it immensely and is thinking of it the next morning when practicing self-defense with Lalassa, who completes a takedown that throws Kel into a door. The maid is afraid that Kel will dismiss her for hurting her, and Kel laughs and says that she would look silly for dismissing a servant who is doing exactly what she was told to do. Kel tells Lalassa that she wishes she'd tell her who made her so afraid of men. Time skips forward rapidly now, and during training with jousting again, Wilden calls Kel complacent and marks a tiny dot on the target for her to hit since she was getting lazy and not trying to get better after mastering hitting the target. He only has a few of the older pages join her in this added difficulty. After a week of this, her lance breaks. Jorun is long gone, so she grabs a normal lance and fails to hit the target because it is so light. She asks permission to take it and get it weighted, and Wilden is shocked. Neil tells him that Kel trains with weighted weapons, and Wilden is in disbelief, finding out that she has done so since the first week of lance training. The maid of Kel's sister is hanging out with Lalassa now, and tells Kel that her sister wants Lalassa to sew for her for an upcoming event. She says that other ladies might ask her the same since the girl is so talented. Kel agrees and tells Lalassa that she won't take any money she earns sewing, but the girl insists. Kel finally agrees but says that she's putting the money away for a dowry or something for the maid at some point in the future rather than keeping it for herself. Kel runs into Raoul of Golden Lake, and while walking toward the palace, he explains that Wilden was shaken by the page's encounter with the bandits. That's the reason for all of the changes in the page's schedule. The regional commander had assured them that the area was clear, but he had been taking bribes. Wilden almost lost some of his charges, except for Kel's level-headedness saving them. He hadn't taught them how to react without an adult around guiding them. They have a bit of a heart-to-heart over Kel and the others declaring war on hazing. Kel didn't realize that he would have heard of that. He seems to like Kel a lot. Cleon, who is now a squire, has returned and is joking around in his customary way with Kel. The other boys call him out, saying that he shouldn't talk to Kel like that if he doesn't for them. Later on, Cleon comes to find Kel to apologize and say that he didn't mean anything by it. They have a brief but warm interaction, and he tells her that she looks very fit, and he is obviously nervous. She doesn't understand why he would tell her that she looks fit. Jorn has returned with his Knightmaster as well, and tells Kel that he wants to start over and be friends. She's suspicious of him, but largely he seems to be acting like a different person. At midwinter, the lady who defended Kel the previous year asks her how her training is going, and promises to be present at Kel's final exams. Kel receives another expensive, useful gift from her benefactor, too. Kel begins to train herself against her fear of heights on her own, since she isn't getting much punishment work anymore. Jorn finds Kel during one of these times where she's mapping the grounds and talks to her about how he thinks that she's only becoming a knight because she didn't think that she could marry. He tells her that if she stops working herself like a blacksmith, that maybe she would be pretty and her family could find a husband for her. Kel is upset by this, but he leaves. One day she's with her friends and a sparrow comes to get her. She returns to her room to find that Squire Vincent has pulled Lalassa through the window and tried to force himself on her in the courtyard. She's fighting back, but he is strong. Kel challenges his honor and fights him, asking him what kind of a knight forces himself on an unwilling woman. He immediately jumps to explaining how powerful his family is and how Kel will regret fighting him over a maid. Kel wants to report him, but Lalassa begs her not to. She has to explain to Kel that it would make her life hell. The servants would talk, and her uncle would likely be fired, and there would be no way to prove that it didn't happen because a noble was angry with them for reporting their crimes. Kel confronts Vincent and threatens him. She returns to Lalassa, and they talk about the girl's past. How her father and brother hurt her. How they are dead now. How Gower is the only man she knows that she thinks is gentle and won't hurt her because all men hit their wives and women around them. Kel tells her of the time her brother held her out a tower window. Lalassa understands why Kel hates bullies now and tries to protect people. Vincent, Joran, and the other squires leave again. Before they go, Cleon hugs Kel nervously. She doesn't understand that he has feelings for her. The final exams come and go, and Kel becomes a fourth-year page. The summer training is in Dunlap this time, where Kel meets Lady Mora, the ogre Iakoju, and the Long Lake Wolf Pack. Wilden talks to the wolves as if they are people. Stefan the hostler talks to Kel about Peach Blossom. Kel is sad knowing that she won't have the money to buy the horse once she is done with her training. He also tells Kel how Wilden's fief is known for breeding fine dogs, which is why he has taken a liking to Jump so much. Kel spends the summer with her parents. The fourth-year pages do a field exercise involving command. Kel is shockingly appointed commander of the defense force, and under her leadership, they fend off the attacking pages, despite Quindon, who is on her side, letting some of the attackers by in an effort to make her look bad. Time jumps by at a blinding speed at this point. Midwinter passes, and Kel receives a new sword as a gift from her benefactor. She counts the money she is saving for Lalassa and realizes that Lalassa will be able to buy her own shop, and soon. The maid leaves to work on the queen's gown with her friend, Kel's sister's maid, and there are two strange men lurking in the courtyard outside Kel's room. The next day, Kel realizes Lalassa hasn't returned. Neither has Jump, who had gone with her. After speaking with everyone trying to find her, she receives a note saying that Lalassa is in the palace and Kel can find her if she looks. The note says not to tell anyone or they will hurt the girl. Kel can't stomach the thought of Lalassa being scared and alone, so she decides to look for her instead of taking her exams. She tells Neil and he tries to stop her, knowing that she will have to repeat all of her years as a page if she misses the exams. She ignores him and begins her search. She searches in vain until the sparrows come and lead her to Baelor's Needle, the terrifying building the king had to help her get down earlier on in the story. Fortunately, she has been practicing conquering her fear. She is still terrified, but finds her maid at the top and frees her. She frees Jump as well, who had been tied up with Lalassa. His leg is injured, so she has to make a sling and carry him on it. The door has been locked behind her, however, so they must get down using the outer stair of the tower. One stair gives way and Kel is injured. She freezes on the stairs and Lalassa talks her through it, telling her how happy she is that Kel came for her and how much Kel has changed her life. They are met at the bottom by rescuers, who had found a note pinned to Kel's door that said, "Try Baelor's Needle." They are taken in and healed and questioned. The guards bring them the culprits, saying they had been found surrounded by a pack of palace dogs and were all chewed up, so they had kept them in custody until they figured out what they were doing there. Kel is brought back to her room by her mother, and she sleeps. She wakes to find Wilden and her mother there. Wilden is acting strange. He takes Kel to dinner and is oddly warm toward her. Jorn and his friends are crappy to her, asking her when she's leaving because they assume she will not want to repeat her years for missing the exam. She sasses them back and then sits with her friends, who are happy that she is safe. Wilden gives his nightly prayer, but for the first time ever, he invokes the goddess as well as the god Mithros. He prays for hate to be stripped from the eyes of those listening. The chief of the page's exams comes in and speaks to them all. He announces that Kel will get to take her exams in 2 days since circumstances were out of her control, causing her to miss them today. Everyone shows up for her exams, except for Alana, of course. Her family, Sir Miles, Dane, etc., etc. At the squire celebration that evening, Wilden quietly congratulates Kel, and she thanks him, honored at his praise. Stefan is waiting when Kel returns to her room. He gives her Peach Blossom's paperwork. Peach Blossom has been bought for her by her benefactor, and all of his boarding fees are paid up for 4 years. Stefan leaves, not telling her who bought Peach Blossom for her. The influence of Harry Potter is impossible to miss in this series. The first Harry Potter book was released a couple years before the series was published, and the structure of this story is honestly more like A Year at Hogwarts than it is any of Pierce's previous books in the Land of Tortall. The vast amount of changes for the training are hand-waved away multiple times as John changing stuff after he came into his crown. Some other changes in the world aren't addressed at all, though. I know it's kind of dumb to harp on this, and I promise I'll only do it for a couple minutes, but the Spydrin thing really kind of bugs me. There's no explanation in the narrative that Spydrins are bigger now for some reason, they just are. It's reinforced in the intro of this book where they talk about Kel's sparrows, leading them to a nest of the enormous spider creatures called Spydrins, and I get that 10-foot and bigger half spider, half human creatures are a hell of a lot scarier than some 5 to 6 foot tall ones, though I would argue that any spider bigger than the size of a flea is pretty horrifying. It feels like she just assumed her audience wouldn't track that she changed it. If I'm wrong and she's addressed this in the narrative at some point, please correct me. I just get really annoyed when any writer assumes that their audience will be too stupid to pick up on something. Especially when that audience is meant to be young adults or kids. Like, it's no big deal, kids are dumb, they won't notice. For an author who otherwise tries really hard to represent kids as complex beings in her work, it seems really hypocritical to assume that they won't notice something like that. I noticed it when I was younger. If you go back to my episodes on the Immortals, I even mentioned in one of them that I was always confused since I first read those books about how big Spydrins were. Because I remembered them being described as regular human size, but also remembered them being described as huge and couldn't reconcile those two things when I was really young. So it just confused me. Now, upon rereading this series, I'm realizing it wasn't me, it was the author messing with her own continuity. The introduction of Lalassa in this book was welcome for me. I don't like the female leads of these books existing in a world where the author only allows them to interact with men. Their bond is developed really well over the years that take place in this book. It's also nice to have an older female character in the story to explain things like puberty to Kel, explaining to her the different ways that her monthly cycle can affect her. It doesn't seem like much to an adult, but to a young adult or a child who is reading these books, it's really nice to have something like that talked about normally. Not like it's some disgusting, horrible thing that needs to be kept secret. I know it went a long way for me to help normalize my monthly periods when I was a kid reading this. Particularly, I like seeing Kel confronted with another girl who is the polar opposite of her personality. Kel is stoic and quiet, where Lalassa wears her emotions on her sleeve, even if that emotion is just fear. Kel's frustration with how scared Lalassa is provides some good insight to how Kel doesn't understand her own privilege. She consistently wants to report the men who abuse her maid, and it takes Lalassa begging her not to and explaining what life is like for a commoner, particularly a common woman in the world they live in. Kel rightly recognizes that it isn't right for people like Lalassa to fear even speaking out against their abusers for fear of retaliation. Though I would argue the correct response would be to abolish the monarchy and system of nobility that oppresses people who aren't lucky enough to be born noble, but it's a fantasy book that needs its kings and queens and knights, so I guess I can't have everything. Kel's sisters being more present in this book is a nice addition as well. I like how they are horrified to see her serving them at the midwinter banquet, but it isn't necessarily discussed at her. but at the fact that some of their marriage prospects are from very conservative families whose elders wouldn't condone a marriage if they knew that the siblings were in any way close. It sheds light on just how sexist the system remains despite the efforts of individual people like Alana and Thayet. It's almost like having a woman figurehead in a position of power doesn't actually change systemic oppression. There are two big things that frustrate me in this book. Sometimes it falls into the trap of everyone who is friends with the main character is a good guy and everybody who doesn't like her is a mean bad guy. Even when the pages who aren't friends with her join in on the standoff with Joran, it is framed as they think Kel was right all along now, rather than them just not interacting with her in the beginning. They're on her side now, so they're not bad guys anymore. The second is something I've seen discussed in a few places online, which is that the things we learn about the Yamani in this series fall under the, and I'm sorry for saying this, inscrutable Oriental stereotype. The entire Yamani race is painted in broad strokes with a brush colored by racist stereotypes that exist in our world. It's 2 books in, and we haven't seen any indication of that stereotype not being true for every Yamani. Even Hakuin is described as more friendly than the average Yamani. Every time Kel is making her blank, inscrutable face, her friends call it her Yamani mask. The bullies call her the Yamani lump because she appears emotionless all the time. Then every time Kel tells a story of the Yamani emperor, it's something wildly ridiculous about how he will execute a whole group of people for not bowing properly. She even remembers a time where her father told her that not every ruler can be a good person at one point after one of these extremely over-the-top violent things that the emperor did. I just feel uncomfortable that this is the 3rd series in this universe, and in each series we have seen the good white vaguely European characters facing off or being involved negatively with some savage backwards group of people who aren't vaguely white medieval Europeans. And of those 3 series, 2 of them have featured emperors of whole nations who are twisted, savage, and cruel in contrast to our white heroes and their vaguely European progressive nation. It's got some real cultural imperialism overtones, where the noble white must teach the backward savage the error of their ways. I talked about this a lot in the Woman Who Rides Like a Man video, so I won't get a whole lot more into it here. But I will say that it's something very common in fantasy writing to have to make a whole race, nation, etc. show a few obvious characteristics and not much else, because there's not a lot of time to flesh out each individual and make them 3-dimensional characters. It's just not great every time you see direct analogs for actual nations in our real world who have historically dealt with these same negative stereotypes not being challenged. To be clear, I am writing this knowing that in the next couple books, a Yamani is introduced who is fleshed out a lot, but I'm talking as if I don't already know that. A reader who picks up these books right now won't have some mystical foreknowledge of that, and neither did anybody who reads this book on publication 20 years ago. We shouldn't have to wait 2 or 3 books for a very negative stereotype to be addressed by introducing characters who fly in the face of it. Whew. Anyway, there's some really good planting and payoff in this book. Everything happens for a meticulously planned reason, and I can't help but compliment that because of how often I read stories for young adults that leave plot threads dangling all over the place. The rapid passage of time was handled so much better in this book than in the original Alana Quartet. You can see the evolution of the author's ability to pace the story. I do have some more thoughts on this, but I will wait until the next time to share them, since they'll be more relevant to future installments in this series. Thanks so much for joining me. I am struggling to sit up and write and record right now because I'm still not supposed to be sitting upright for long periods, but I didn't want to miss too many weeks of uploads. Next week I should be able to stick to my normal schedule, and we will have book 3 of Protector of the Small, Squire. Please like this video if you've stuck with me this far. It does help me a lot, and share with anybody that you think might be interested, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, go to patreon.com/writingwomen, and you can follow me on Twitter at witchytrash if you want, but I don't really post on there a whole lot. Thank you to my current patrons, Mariodoc Brandybuck, Ms. Psycho, Amy Chu, aka The Doctor, and Bruce.